Discovery Channel.
We have opted to skip the worst of Tehran's rush hour. By 8:30 in the morning, the subway system is more than tolerable.
1.2 million people every day just come on board.
Still, riders of the New York subway or the London Underground would recognize the look, that vague, unfocused, middle-distance stare. One notable difference, of course, no women. They're on the train, are indeed technically free to ride with the men if they choose to, but they don't. They have their own carriages, first and last on the train. There is both more and less to the issue of gender segregation in Iran than some Westerners would make of it, but more of that later. Welcome to Tehran. 30 years ago, Iran's capital was a city of 2 to 3 million. Now it wheezes and bulges at around 15 million. That contributes to massive social problems, underemployment, widespread drug addiction, a huge and restless majority of young people under 30. They manage to be simultaneously spoiled and disgruntled, resentful of their government, and yet nationalists who are profoundly patriotic. It was their mothers' and fathers' generation, though, which changed the course of history. This, of course, is what used to be the U.S. Embassy until a bunch of radical students back in November of 1979 seized it and took all the Americans inside hostage. There are other reasons why the U.S. government considers Iran to be dangerous these days, but if you want to talk about the roots of American resentment toward this country, what happened inside the U.S. Embassy here is a pretty good starting point. But raise that with almost any Iranian, and he or she will respond by saying, ah, yes, but look at what you guys did back in 1953 when the CIA conspired with British intelligence to overthrow the freely elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, replacing him with the Shah. And that's essentially the way you can define U.S.-Iranian relations these days. Tit for tat, grievance for grievance. When a group of Iranian journalists were denied entry to the United States, trying to accompany President Ahmadinejad to the General Assembly at the United Nations, the Iranians immediately responded by saying, well, when Koppel and that Discovery Group leave, that's it. We will be issuing visas to no more American journalists. As trivial as that may be, the real grievances run deep. What is now a museum used to be an imperial palace. It was here on New Year's Eve 1977 that Jimmy Carter raised a champagne toast to the Shah of Iran, whom he described as an island of stability in one of the more troubled areas of the world. For 25 years, one American president after another, Democrat and Republican alike, counted on the Shah to provide stability in the Persian Gulf. Washington flattered him, overlooked his excesses, tolerated his regime's human rights abuses, and sold his military the most sophisticated weapons systems. In fact, it was U.S. and British intelligence that had plucked the young Shah out of obscurity in 1953 and gave him real power. Prime Minister Mossadegh had made the mistake of nationalizing Iran's oil industry, so he was overthrown. When, 25 years later, the Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew the Shah, Ibrahim Yazdi became the new government's foreign minister. He is still outraged by what happened in 1953.
So the military coup managed, organized by the American agents in Iran. To many Iranians, that was an unforgettable sin that the Americans committed against democracy in Iran. To many of us, American government at the time suffocated democracy in embryonic stage in Iran.
The United States, which is now so concerned about Iran's development of nuclear technology, was in the process of giving it to the Shah. Was it clear that it would be controlled so that there was no danger of the Shah getting nuclear weapons?
All that I know, British, Americans, Germans, France, all they were supporting the Shah's grand design for the nuclear energy.
Some of you may remember Massoumi Iftikhar as the fluent American English speaker who served as spokeswoman for the hostage takers at the U.S. Embassy back in 1979. She was known in those days as Sister Mary and widely loathed by Americans.
And there were very limited number of us who were able to survive while struggling against the regime.
If you had known then what it would lead to in terms of this broken relationship between Iran and the United States for more than a quarter of a century now, would you have done it?
I think that we had enough reasons to take that action at that time. The students felt very desperate. They felt that if they do not take action now, the Islamic Revolution would be undermined just as it was undermined in 1953 by a CIA-engineered coup d'etat in Iran.
So here we are 27 years later, and if anything, the feelings are even more suspicious of one another, hostility-laden.
That's very unfortunate, because I think that if the Americans in those very early days, if they had switched sides, they had taken side with the Shah, that was clear. They could have changed sides, and now they could have sided with the Islamic Revolution.
Some 20 years later, Iftikhar was named Iran's first woman vice president as part of a reform movement.
There was an opportunity to see things in a different light, but unfortunately, it was not only taken properly, but on the contrary, during the we can say the climax of the reform process in Iran, Iran was termed as an member of the axis of evil by the Bush administration, and that was a severe blow to the reform.
That's a nasty phrase.
To the reform process in Iran,
the
because
axis of evil. Do you think it sort of matches the great Satan?
Well,
I mean, do you
it's a
think
game
there's
of rhetoric. This is the way it goes. But
exactly.
The reality is
Words.
that this blow came at a time that we were moving and pushing for a genuine democratic movement in Iran. We're trying to bring...
the United States is still being denounced by Iran as the great Satan.
Oh.
Right? What do you mean? What is meant by... You see, I must confess, I made the mistake back in 1979 when I first heard that phrase, the great Satan, of thinking, what a silly phrase. They don't really mean it. But you did mean it. You meant exactly that. You meant that the United States was, in a sense, the embodiment of evil.
I think that Imam made that reference to the United States based on that understanding that the Americans have no recognition for human rights when it comes to their interests. The only thing that they see is to protect those interests by any means.
When Iftikhar talks about the Imam, she's referring to the Ayatollah Khomeini, long dead, of course. His tomb, now a massive monument, visited by so many pilgrims from all over Iran that a shopping center has been erected next to the monument. It's an ideal opportunity for people from small villages to get the appliances that they could normally buy only in Tehran. Still, Khomeini, the religious leader, the revolutionary, the severe, forbidding, anti-Western, anti-American presence, remains a force. And the displays of public anger against America that he first inspired more than 25 years ago echo to this day.